Welcome everyone to the Canadian Studies Center in the Henry M. Jackson School of International Studies at the University of Washington in Seattle. And as Marion said, my name is Nadine Chappie. I'm the Managing Director of the Canadian Studies Center and just delighted to have you all here today. And I want to just begin by acknowledging that we all come from different places across North America, maybe even beyond. And I'd like to ask you to just pause for a minute and think about the land you're on, who was there before you, how they cared for that space, and who is there now, including the flora and fauna or the animals that also seek to thrive and survive in our communities. The Henry M. Jackson School of International Studies acknowledges that we're on Coast Salish territory, the traditional homelands of the Duwamish, Suquamish, Tuvalu, Muckleshoot, and other Indigenous peoples. The Jackson School understands that the international community includes sovereign American Indian tribes, First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples, and Indigenous peoples from across the world. And I want to begin by welcoming some of our special guests, and I know there's many special guests, but some of our close friends of the center, Joel Padgett, the former president of the Canada America Society. I think Megan Graves is here from our Canadian consulate. Andrea Dorca from Alliance Française, who provides superb training for our students. Faye Alicani from Go Global at UBC, and Gary and Consuelo Corbett, who founded our center's regional exchange program. And of course, no program at our center takes place without the expertise of Marion Ferguson, our exchange manager, who I think is just leaving us, and thanks for setting this up. So I'm delighted to introduce you today to our wonderful friend and colleague, Donald Chapman. And I know many of you online today know Don very well. He's a University of Washington alumnus and a former United Airlines pilot. His interest in citizenship began when his own Canadian citizenship was revoked when he was a child. And there began his fight to restore citizenship rights to himself and also others. Don's been the inspiration and the force behind, I believe, 7 parliamentary bills in Canada to amend the Canadian Citizenship Act. And as a result, Canadian citizenship has been granted retroactively to somewhere between 1 and 2 million individuals, including, I might add, to one of our former librarians and one of our deans. In 2015, Don's book, The Lost Canadians, A Struggle for Citizenship Rights, Equality and Identity, was published, telling the story of his incredible involvement over his lifetime. So I'm delighted to introduce you to Donald Chapman, a wonderful friend of the Canadian Studies Center, and to the many individuals as a result of his dedication and care for human rights. So welcome, Don. Delighted to have you with us.
Thank you very much, Nadine. And I'm going to start. Everybody, I'm practicing for the first time for the reality of screen sharing and everything else. So what we're going to do is I'm going to go right here to the Lost Canadians. And you'll see that today is April 9th, which is a big day in Canada. I'll get to that in a minute. This is from the Canadian Encyclopedia on Lost Canadians. This is run by the Canadian government, so it gives legitimacy to the fact that they're even calling it My Crusade. And then I've always taken a bit of a pride in the fact that a magazine called me Canada's most irritating activist. And that's okay. As long as I'm fighting for equal rights, I'm actually okay with that. So let me go back and start with, I'm probably dealing with one of the most important issues in the world today, and it's called citizenship, but people don't quite understand that. They don't give it much thought. As we come face to face with global warming, over time, there are going to be climate refugees. That means it's really important for politicians to hone in on the issue now before there's a mass movement of people. But that said, senators, congressmen, MPs, presidents, prime ministers, they all tend to react only after the fact and not before. In aviation terms, no one wants to be on a plane flown by a pilot who'd never even given the thought of what happens if I lose an engine. Ignorance becomes a recipe for disaster, and governments need to be prepared. Citizenship, just on average, isn't something a person thinks much about until there are problems, and generally only when you or a loved one are affected. But yet it's fundamental to our being, which is identity. Usually first comes family, followed by the country of one's allegiance. Canadians overall are not good at being able to describe who they are. They're way, way better at telling you who they're not, like we're not Americans. Picture asking a young child if they're part of the Smith family. They come back and say, well, I'm not a Jones. That's Canada. In 2008, Maclean's magazine did a symposium called Canada, Nation or Notion. The night's moderator was a well-respected journalist, and he said, we all too often define ourselves against the American example as if we couldn't define ourselves except in opposition to them. As the evening progressed, the two debaters were ironically not even Canadian. Both thought they were, they had right to assume that, they had been citizens, but because of the anachronistic legislation in place at the time, each one of them had unknowingly been stripped of their citizenship. Why? Because they were foreign born and not in Canada on their 24th birthday. Welcome Adam Gopnik and Malcolm Gladwell to the strange world of being a lost Canadian. One day you're a citizen, the next you're not, and with no warning. And now I'm going to do my best to go back to this screen sharing, and I'm going to share a slide that, and again, please excuse my newness on this. This is a term that a lot of people are talking about today, global citizens. And this is put out by the Coalition of Global Citizenship. And they are a group that is dealing with both the public and private sector, and they form a basis of values of just and fair treatment, inclusion, and cooperation in a world in which human dignity and the fulfillment of our basic human rights are assured. And that's, let me, again, my newness to all this, I apologize. It's a wonderful goal and it's worthy of pursuit, but consider that Canada, a self-promoting human rights country, citizenship-wise is currently violating 3 United Nations Human Rights Conventions, as well as the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which ironically was to a great extent written by a Canadian from New Brunswick. So if Canada can't get their act together with their own laws of identity, then how in the world will they ever be able to embrace the global citizenship concept? And now to politicians. They seem to care mainly about getting reelected. And when they're not, they're busy with their constituents. So best of luck getting one of them interested. And especially during this more populist environment. Plus, politicians are often motivated by what they read and hear in the media. In my book, The Lost Canadians, I dedicate a chapter to discussing the Canadian media. And my apologies for the for being kind of crude. Again, I'm going to go back to the screen sharing here. But this is my book, and the chapter is called Dog Poop, Farts, Toads, and Britney Spears. So why would I have picked such a title? It's because in 2006, the government of Canada had put 67,000 people on trial to be booted out of Canada, 45,000 war brides and 22,000 of their children. And during that year, the Canadian press did not deem it worthy of one news story, but they did 345 stories on Britney Spears, Paris Hilton, Celine Dion, and one other, Lindsay Lohan, like I would care. But when it came to the 10-year time frame of Lost Canadians around that issue, this is what the Canadian press decided was important. These are the stories, the number of stories they did during that time frame. And you can see cats way up there, Lost Canadians down here right at the bottom next to dog poop. And that is why I did that, because the Canadian media has, honest to goodness, been absolutely horrid in helping us, as for the most part has academia in Canada. Very few universities and schools have shown much interest, including organizations and civil rights groups. Now, getting back to citizenship, The laws of identity in Canada remain so convoluted and confusing that MPs and senators who are elected or appointed to represent Canadian citizens don't actually know what one is. Put into different terms, just who is or is not entitled to citizenship remains a mystery. Also, politicians don't understand terms such as nationality and citizenship, for which in the United States and Canada have become conflated. For most countries, these terms have really very different meanings. For example, babies are generally born with nationality, but for citizenship, that's not always the case. Citizenship or nationality tends to be derived just two ways: jus soli, which is birth on soil, or jus sanguine, which is citizenship due to the nationality or connection of the child's parent to the country. Well, many countries do not recognize citizenship due to birth on soil. Canada and the US do. In Mexico, as with scads of other nations, you're born a national, then at the age of adulthood, you simply apply for and get citizenship, which is the right to participate in society. So with that, I'm going to go back to my share screen. And again, I'm not the best at doing this, so let's see if I can get it. I've got to get rid of that, I think, and then I'm going to play the part of this video. Can you see that okay?
What does it mean to be an American?
This land is your land.
No, Don, we don't see it.
Well,
Okay.
it's
Let me go back.
Dawn,
Yeah.
open the video and stop it, and then go to screen share. And when you go to screen share where you see the video, click on it.
There we go. How's this? Let me go back to it.
Yes, and then if you can.
There
right.
we go.
Good, perfect.
what does it mean to be an American?
This land is your land.
What about a citizen?
This land is my land.
The original Constitution is silent on the subject of citizenship.
From California.
It doesn't have any statement of who is a citizen or who isn't.
In that space of this undefined term citizen, racism was allowed to flourish.
At the heart of the 14th Amendment is the definition of citizens in America. It is through this definition that all the rights we cherish are granted and defended. Racial equality, marriage equality,
Women's equal citizenship, the right to have rights.
and under the law, everyone in America gets equal protection.
Was made for you and me.
Fellow Americans, this is a problem which faces us all.
Okay, I'm gonna go back to I think, how do I stop the screen sharing? There it is up there. And so, as the video says, citizenship is the right to have rights. Without it, a person might not have police protection, retirement benefits, the ability to get a driver's license, to have judicial rights and protection, and most importantly, no one in government has a duty to protect your rights or to represent your best interests. Adolf Hitler knew this only too well, as his first official act once becoming Germany's chancellor was to strip the Jews of their citizenship. Former conservative MP Diana Blonsky went on the record several years ago, equating the loss of citizenship to capital punishment. And she was right, at least for the 6 million European Jews who not only lost their rights, but in time lost their lives. Stripping people of citizenship is a very big deal. But because things have gone on so smoothly for so long, people, and especially Canadians, tend to take citizenship rights for granted. Like the air we breathe, everything is fine. That is, until it's not, like lost Canadians. Another problem is that Canadians tend to believe all the government slogans like peace, order, good government, fairness, compassion, and human rights. Hence, when someone comes along like me claiming that Canada is currently a human rights violating country, they don't believe me. Plus, Canada is known for accepting hundreds of thousands of immigrants per year. So people kind of look at me and say, well, if you can't get it, something must be really wrong with you. Because, hey, we take just about anybody. But it does beg the question, why then don't the politicians want their own people? It makes absolutely no sense, which is why I frequently get dismissed as being the nut bar on aisle 7. people have a really hard time coming to grips with things like what I'm about to show you. So back to the screen share, hoping it all works. And this is the appendices from Citizenship and Immigration Canada. And this is a screen. I'm going to highlight this area next on the next screen, and there it is. These are the exact words, and they came down from the British, written by basically pompous, rich British white men, and they were throughout the entire British colonies. And it said, married women, minors, lunatics, and idiots will be classified under the same disability for their national status. And what that meant in law was that married women were property of their husbands, and children, like me, were property of the fathers if born in wedlock, and property of the mothers if born out of wedlock. Keep that in mind as we go forward, this property thing of married women, minors, lunatics, and idiots, because so much of Canadian citizenship history hinges on that. Now to my story. When I was 6, my father took out US citizenship. I was born in wedlock, so I was considered his property, and hence, when he became a US citizen, Canada ripped up mine. And that never really settled with me. Even at that young, tender age, I wanted to be Canadian. But if I mentioned my desire of that to people in the US, they'd respond almost as though I was really ungrateful. Most just never could understand why I wanted my identity to be someone who came from north of the 49th parallel. Others had an almost disdain, a sort of, well, America, love it or leave it attitude. Often they'd say, you're already in the world's greatest country with the world's greatest people, you must not like us. But of course this wasn't true. I love the US, then and now. My analogy is you get married, you have your parents, and now you have your in-laws, hopefully. You love them both, and you become integral parts of both families. It was never that I didn't want my US citizenship. It's just that I wanted to be Canadian, but that was not the way it was going to be. So once again, I became an unwilling victim to Canada's Rubik's Cube of identity because I was born in wedlock, in Canada, and not adopted. Had any of those factors been different, I would have remained Canadian. Confused? Well, no wonder. Because again, Canadian citizenship law is outdated, misdefined, unfair, and what you don't know can hurt you. Certainly as a toddler, I didn't know anything about the legislative intricacies, but I did know that Canada didn't want me. And I also knew at that young age I wanted to be an airline pilot. In September 2019, I retired from a 30-plus year career at United Airlines. So being around pilots all my life, I can say with certainty that we're inquisitive. We want to know and learn from past accidents and incidents. It's not to blame, but it's to gain insight. We don't want to make the same mistakes. So it was with that psyche which carried me through the Lost Canadian saga, always digging to get at the root cause of why I was not a citizen of the country that I was born in, and why I was a citizen of the country that I never vowed allegiance to. And it became a lifelong quest. Another pilot trait is that we don't ditch an airplane in the Hudson River and then knowingly leave people behind. You do everything to rescue them all. If only the politicians in Ottawa or Washington, D.C. or anywhere else in the world did the same. Also noteworthy is that long after laws get enacted, politicians often don't feel those effects, but not so with pilots. We're usually the first ones at the crash site and often the first to die. We share a common goal with our passengers. That can't be said always with politicians. When I turned 18, I traveled to Canada. I asked for a resumption of citizenship. The bureaucrats promptly turned me down. I then went back year after year, never letting up. How can I be Canadian? It was always followed by rejection. On one trip to Vancouver, I went into Air Canada, applying for a job. They rejected me. But in fairness, they couldn't hire me because I didn't have legal status. I became a part-time visitor in my own land. And throughout this saga, it was interesting because Canadians were very quick to judge me and other lost Canadians. Overall, Canadians weren't keen to have us back. It was as though Canadians believed that we'd abandoned our homeland. Little did I know that I had come from the most difficult country for acceptance. I came from Canada. Years turned into decades. I kept trying. No avail. In the 1990s, I stepped up my quest. A friend of mine, being a Vancouver journalist, wrote a story, and afterwards, several people contacted me. Not necessarily did they have the same exact circumstances, but for our desire to regain our identities and our love of Canada, we paddled from the same canoe. And as the internet came of age, I started a website. I needed a name. I contacted somebody who knew about the internet and websites, and a day later, he came back with several names and suggestions. I picked Lost Canadian, and that's the way it's been ever since for people like me, and the way even today Parliament describes it. Immediately with the internet, people started contacting me. The first two, well, not the first two, but the first two that stayed with me and said, look, I'm going to get in this fight with you, was Magali Castro-Gear and Charles Bosdet. And then there was also a lawyer in Vancouver. We teamed up to fight the government. Charles and Magali, they, like me, had had their citizenship stripped as minors. Both ended up becoming stateless. Magali, she was really in a precarious situation because she had sponsored her Swiss husband to Canada and her children, and yet Magali had no idea that her citizenship had been canceled, and for that matter, neither did Canada. It was only when she went to renew her third passport did the government come back and say, well, you know, you're not Canadian. And finally, she ended up going to court, and part of the settlement that she did not accept the settlement, but the government came back and said, we'll give you citizenship, but you have to become an immigrant. You have to pay huge fees, pass medical exams, and then, and the best way that I could describe that one is to show you what Magali had gone through. So back to the screen sharing, and hope I'm getting it a little better from here. Here's a little bit of Magali's story.
This is a gag order. What is that? Canada telling me I have to sign on this dotted line and shut up, and we'll give you citizenship. To me, I don't think I'll ever get over the shock that I mean, even now reading it, I just can't believe that they would do that.
And in fact,
This is a gag order.
Canada did just that. And probably because Magali went to court, she ended up getting a 5-4 citizenship grant. Charles and I did not. But even today, 17 years after Magali left Canada, because she wouldn't sign that gag order, so Canada forced her to leave. They went to Switzerland, where her husband lives, or well, where he's from. And 17 years later, they have not come back because, frankly, they had spent most all of their retirement money in the court case. And her husband's saying, I don't want to live in a country that treats people like that. And how could anyone blame him? On the bright side, though, children like me had a path, a rocky one, mind you, to get back into Canada, but not so for the war brides. For most of their children, the border babies, the age 24 and age 28 folks, and all the other categories of lost Canadians who are now beginning to turn up on my radar. At the time, we ended up identifying 15 ways to be stripped or denied citizenship. Our band of brothers and sisters was growing. In 2006, I put together a research team, picking 5 members, all of them being incredibly smart, talented, and dedicated. And we then conducted our own accident investigation into the Canadian government. In 2008, we got Bill C-37 passed, which retroactively recognized, as Nadine said, between 1 and 2 million people. Once again, I'm going to go back to the screen share. And this video came out right after Bill C-37.
What a difference a day makes. On April 17th,
2009. You or someone you know may wake up Canadian.
Good morning. Welcome.
New rules may give you Canadian citizenship, even if you live outside Canada. Waking up Canadian? Go to www.cic.gc.ca/citizenship to find out more. A message from the Government of Canada.
Okay. 240,000 Canadians went south to the US between 1947 and 77, and all of them, including their children, regained their Canadian status. A lot of well-known people are among them, and especially in Hollywood and NASA and Boeing, and you have 4 or 5 Nobel Prize recipients. But it turned out our victory was both sweet and sour. Wonderful in that it corrected the problem for most people, but it was also bitter because Canada was knowingly and willingly leaving out 5% of the lost Canadians. That and C-37 created a whole new category, which were babies and children of lost Canadians, or of not lost Canadians, but of Canadian citizens. So let me now play another quick video.
Well, we've told you this story over the past few years, the one of the so-called lost Canadians, people who always thought they were Canadian, but suddenly discovered they were not. It was all because of a little-known law. After our stories, the government promised a fix, and fast. So why were so many still lost Canadians protesting today? Our senior correspondent, Terry Malevsky, went to find out. They're still out in the cold, the last of the so-called lost Canadians, people who lost their Canadian citizenship or never got it because of mysterious quirks in the law. The government pledged to fix their problems, but dozens are still being denied a passport, even if they're descended from a Canadian hero. Some are descended from a female Canadian instead of a male. Some are the children of war brides. Some were just born in the wrong place. Like the newest lost Canadian, little Rachel Chandler. Her Canadian dad works in China, where she was born. Now, at 5 months old, she is cute, blue-eyed, and stateless. The Chinese say she's not Chinese, but even though Rachel's father is Canadian, he too was born outside Canada, so she's out of luck.
She absolutely has the right to be a Canadian citizen. There's no question about it.
The baby's father, grandfather, and aunt are all Canadian. Still, Rachel cannot even enter Canada.
I would love to have my niece with me. I would like to show her off around Mississauga. I would like to show her to my friends.
Little Rachel is only the latest poster child for the lost Canadians. 81 of them are still telling their stories of bureaucratic absurdity.
My father was a Canadian soldier in the Second World War, and I'm being denied citizenship because my parents weren't able to marry until I was 2.
But because I was born in 1945. Then there's Archie Ford. His mom was Canadian, but that was before they allowed mothers to pass on their nationality. The immigration minister says just follow the process.
Rather than having, press conferences or trying to politicize their application, just make a solid application, make a strong case, and it'll be considered fairly on the merits of their case.
But the lost Canadians say that's just the problem, that they do bring solid cases and still get turned down. As for baby Rachel in China, she's either going to be stateless or Irish. Turns out that her Canadian grandfather was born in Ireland, and the Irish government says no problem. If she can't be a Canadian, we'll take her. Terry Malevsky, CBC News, Ottawa.
And little Rachel is almost 12 years old today, and she's still not a Canadian citizen. And the number of children like Rachel could be in the tens of thousands by now. Now, there are 3 constants that have always been true of CIC, which is Citizenship and Immigration Canada, but that's the old name. The new name that the Trudeau government picked was IRCC, which stands for Immigration, Refugees, and Citizenship Canada, which happens to also be the order of importance to the government, and citizenship being dead last. It was Canada's way then and Now, the constants, IRCC does not know their own laws. 2, they constantly make mistakes and usually default to denying people. And finally, that last thing that the citizenship minister said about Rachel Chandler is just bring us good cases. Well, we do. And so the government almost always turns them down, but they want that ability to do it case by case rather than the way it's supposed to be is by operation of law. And for now, there are other areas that that remain. So once again, I'm going to go to the PowerPoint and I'm going to start explaining as we go through this. One of the ways is the age 28 rule. And if you were born from February 15th, 1977 forward, and you're of the second generation born abroad, and you did not reaffirm your citizenship by your 28th birthday, Canada just expired your citizenship. Now, when you're born as a baby, you don't really, know the laws. And frankly, Canada didn't know their laws. They completely forgot this was on the books. So the first person affected wasn't really affected for 28 years. And when Bill C-37 came out, the government said, okay, age 28 is gone if you haven't yet turned 28. But if you've already turned 28, well, you're already out. So Canada did, with the age 28 exclusion, what the Brits did in Canada in the way they abolished slavery. In 1793, they said slavery is illegal, except if you're already a slave, you'll remain a slave till the day you die. But other than that, anybody new can't be a slave. So what we're trying to do is get rid of the age 28, just get rid of it in its entirety. And oh, by the way, this woman woke up one day, again, went to go get a passport, and they said, you're no longer Canadian. The gender discrimination is a big deal. Remember that married women, minors, lunatics, and idiots. So Pierre and Mary, while they are real people, I'm going to kind of substitute the names of my brother and sister. They were adopted. I'm not. And had I been adopted, I would have remained Canadian. So my brother and sister got to keep their citizenship where I didn't. So my brother, Norm, and my sister, Ruth. Well, because they were Canadian, and both, by the way, married Americans and had children in the United States. So Norm, my brother, could pass citizenship to his children, and they in turn, when they had children, Norm's grandchildren, they could be Canadian. But my sister Ruth, being a woman, could not pass on citizenship. And so they got locked out. When Bill C-37 came into play, the government said, okay, first generation born abroad only. So that locked out Ruth's grandchildren. So that is still a really big deal. And in the Indian Act, the courts in Canada have declared that that is blatantly discriminatory and unconstitutional. So let's go to the next slide. Canada has a real problem with statelessness. It's one of the leading countries in the world of making people stateless. And this was an Indigenous Canadian, this gentleman right here in the middle, Donovan. And he was born in 1954. Both his parents were residential school survivors. So they'd been physically, mentally, and sexually abused, and they watched a lot of their classmates die. So when they were adults and she got pregnant, there was no way that they were going to have their baby in a hospital, because that meant Donovan would be taken from them at about age 5 or 6. So that's a problem today. A lot of people have never been registered in the Indigenous community. Here's another person who, well, she has her own story. Watch this.
To Her Majesty, Queen Elizabeth II, Queen of Canada.
I'm just glad to finally be accepted into Canada. I had fell through the cracks of both the Citizenship Act and the Indian Act, which is the Indian Act. I should have Indian status through my grandmother because she's a full First Nation of Canada. Citizenship Act, for somebody born abroad, as long as you meet special requirements to prove a substantial connection to Canada, you can apply for your citizenship before your 28th birthday. And they changed that law in 2009 retroactively before I could take advantage of that.
So Heather had the right of citizenship, and then the government took it away from her. Heather should have been a citizen really by birth. It was discrimination in the law that kept her from being Canadian.
After 10 years of waiting, I can start my life with my family. I can get a driver's license. I can get a proper SIM card, education, and all the rights and privileges that other people take for granted.
We're sitting here today with Heather and her grandmother, but this did way more than that, because this also affected this cute little girl right here.
She won't have to experience any of the hardship that I went through once I turned 18. And it means a lot to me that we can both, all of us as a family, move forward and not have to worry about this anymore.
Here's another problem with Bill C-37. That's the citizenship minister that denied Rachel, but he was very good at denying a whole lot of people. He's now the premier of the province of Alberta. But Jason Kenney told one of our lost Canadians, and that's Jackie Scott, asking him the question, was my dad a Canadian citizen? And Jason Kenney has bought into this thing that citizenship in Canada did not exist before 1947. So he answered, no. The soldiers were heroes, but not Canadian. As I said, Canada, this is from the United Nations Refugees magazine, and they're highlighting Canada as being a leading country at making people stateless. This is the Economist magazine and Lost in Kafka Land. When is a Canadian a Canadian? This is Are You a Canadian in the Reader's Digest. Canada was actually kicking out Holocaust survivors. I mean, it's shocking. This woman, she was born in Canada, but she lost her citizenship because she married a gentleman who was Polish, because again, she was property of her husband. Even this one is, this gentleman got his German citizenship. He was born probably to a German SS officer. They came a lot of times and raped the women in other countries and then just left the children. And the children many times were stateless or certainly shunned. And finally, in 2009, Germany says, we'll take all those children and give them German citizenship. Canada, no. So it was shocking that Germany was not known at the time for being accepting years ago. Canada was. Now it was reversed. Canada was not taking their people. Now, I said today's a big day in Canada. It is. It's the 104th anniversary of Vimy Ridge. 4 years ago, the Prime Minister said that, and this is his statements, that they were all fighting as citizens of one country. Today, he only uses the word Canadians. He doesn't use the word citizenship. These are different stories that have appeared today on Vimy. But really, I'm going to go back to, let's see, stop screen share. I'm going to go back for a minute and ask the question, when did citizenship begin? And it turns out it's a huge lie that has been perpetuated for now 74 years. So let's go into the history of Canada. Canada became Canada under the British North American Act in 1867. And at the time, the British gave advice to the Canadians, and the Canadians followed suit by basically, it was cultural genocide with the Indigenous people. The idea was to give them citizenship, which allowed them to take their names off the Indian Act. So one of the first things they did was the first Governor General of Canada announced, we've just created a new nationality. And then they started giving citizenship out, and they really wanted to give citizenship to the Indigenous people. They gave it, and in time, they took it away. Then they gave it, they took it away, and then they gave it back finally in the 1960s. So let's fast forward to 1901. In the Canadian census, the enumerator instructions said that the words Canadian, national, and citizen all meant the same thing. Then they passed several acts in Parliament that defined what Canadian citizenship was in 1910, 1918, in the 1920s. Canada sat on the League of Nations in the 1920s. You could not do that if you didn't have your own citizens. So if there weren't citizens, Canada was doing something highly illegal. And now let me go to a really important year in Canadian citizenship history, because it kind of sets the template. And it started right here where I'm sitting in this area in Washington State, Bellingham, Washington. And in September 5th of 1907, the American Ku Klux Klan gathered here and ran out the Chinese and East Indians, a lot going to San Francisco and another group going to Vancouver. 3 days later, September 7th, 1907, the American Ku Klux Klan traveled north into Vancouver and started the Japantown and Chinatown riots. And at the time, the Prime Minister, Mackenzie King, sent out a cabinet minister who was a guy who became instrumental in this lie. The Prime Minister was Wilfrid Laurier, and he sent out Mackenzie King to kind of do an accident investigation, if you will, into what happened out there in Vancouver. And instead of blaming the perpetrators, the American Ku Klux Klan and those that went in with them, he blamed, if you will, the victims. And he stayed and helped author and the Exclusion Acts and the voter suppression laws. He was a racist and an anti-Semite. About 15, 20 years later, he became prime minister during World War II. And his motto on Jewish refugees was, "None is too many." And anyway, after World War II, BC, which was the most racist province of them all, in BC, they went to the prime minister and said, "We want you to get rid of the Asians in Canada." Problem. Mackenzie King, who very much would have liked doing that, but because of what happened to the Jews in Germany, the United Nations had made it a crime against humanity to deport your own citizens. So he couldn't, because they were citizens of Canada. So he came up with an idea, and he went, "Hey, wait a minute." And he issued an order in council, which in the United States is called an executive order, and he canceled their citizenship. And then it was challenged in the Supreme Court of Canada in 1946, and the Supreme Court said, yes, citizenship in Canada, as it was then and remains this way, is simply a legislated right, a privilege in Canada. It's not a right. Now, the United States wanted to go along with Canada and get rid of their Japanese Americans, but they couldn't, because again, citizenship in the States is a constitutional right. And that's why Donald Trump could not take away the citizenship of, let's say, Joe Biden, because he sure would have done it if he could. But in Canada, to this day, they cancel people's citizenship all the time. There's no judicial review. They might send you an email saying you're gone. And so that should send shudders into the Canadian people, because if we elect a Donald Trump, then that person can say, "You didn't vote for me, I'm getting rid of you." So anyway, what happened next, and now let me go back to my screen sharing here, is that on January 1st, 1947, Canada passed what they now say is the first Citizenship Act, but that's not what it was called. It was called an act respecting citizenship, nationality, naturalization, and the status of aliens. And what Mackenzie King was doing, in a way, partly was to cover up his tracks, because he really was, if you will, a crime against humanity, the way he deported. Because once he canceled the Japanese citizenship, he had 3,997 Canadian Japanese deported to a country most had never been to, 700 of which were children born in Canada. So he was kind of covering up a crime that he did. And then he made up a story with the 47 Act and had himself sworn in as Canada's first ever citizen. Wait a minute. And if you type in into Google, Mackenzie King, Canada's first citizen, you'll see there are all kinds of stories about that. But was he? And this is the story of Jackie Scott, who I showed you earlier, that they came back and said, your parents weren't Canadian because they were born before 1947. And it says right here that Mrs. Scott was not a citizen because neither of your parents were citizens at the time of your birth. That is the government's response. And we came back and put a petition in the House of Commons asking that Canada recognize their fallen 111,000 soldiers from World War I and II. And they came back and said, no, we're not going to. And that is one big difference between the United States and Canada. Canadians don't seem to get that upset. That would never go over in the United States. Here is the Healing and Reconciliation monument put up at the Bellingham Library based on what the Ku Klux Klan had done. They have a plaque talking about it. Now to the Chinese story. The Chinese were told that they weren't even citizens of Canada, that they had no status. And if you look here, look down here, and it says, this certificate does not establish legal status in Canada. And this is Douglas Jung, who became Canada's first Chinese member of parliament. And the Chinese, I don't have time to go into a lot of it, but the Chinese were just hammered by these laws. They were told they were not citizens of Canada and had no rights. They couldn't vote and so forth. And yet they were incredible to what they accomplished in World War II. And I'd love to do another Zoom meeting just on the Chinese, because it was just amazing. And I'm lucky enough, I've teamed up with a lot of the Chinese in Vancouver, and I'm very honored to be part of them. This, by the way, was Sin Shim versus King, Supreme Court of Canada, and it was a woman born in Victoria, and she challenged the government saying, I shouldn't have to pay a head tax, and the Canadian Supreme Court said, yes, when the applicant's a Canadian citizen, the Exclusion Act doesn't apply, and that's 1938. This is the Supreme Court of Canada on the canceling of the Japanese citizenship. And the big question, and again, it's amazing that this has never really crossed the minds of Canadians, but how could you cancel citizenship in 1945 if it didn't exist till 1947? And from that case, they even define in the Supreme Court what a Canadian citizen is, and they use it. I mean, they use the term. And in 1945, the Secretary of State of Canada came out and said, people who are now citizens under the existing legislation will still be recognized as citizens. So somebody's been lying. From Pier 21, when the war brides arrived in Canada, right up in here, it says, when you arrive, you'll fill out documents and become a Canadian citizen. This is a death certificate of a soldier who died fighting for Canada. You'll see overseas casualty of war. And in the one box, it says citizenship, Canadian. He died in 1945. Even under the notes, it says he's Canadian citizenship and nationality. This is 1945. So again, back to Vimy Ridge. Today's the anniversary, 104th. In this battalion, this gentleman here was Charles Bosdet's grandfather. He was stripped of his citizenship. So was the father, and so was Charles. That's an original picture taken of the Flanders Fields by that Charles Bosdet Sr. So these are just, I'm going to just run through these really fast. And these are some of the newspapers along the way. And unfortunately, let's see, I don't know if I can get that off or whatever, but here's hypocrisy on the debate on the Chinese. Here's one, and it's crude in today's terms. It's crude back then too, but they put it right in the paper. Hong Kong Japs can be Canadian. Here's one that is in 1977, where the Prime Minister today, his father is the one in the picture, Pierre Elliott Trudeau, and millions invited to become Canadians, but he left out children like me, and he left out some of the Britons, as you can see also in that. And finally, this is what we see in Canada even today, where they tell everybody that in law, everybody's equal and we treat everybody the same, but it's not true. It's just not true. And we have what we want in a new bill. And finally, this bill, I don't think anybody much has seen this. This was just introduced into Parliament a week ago, and it's the latest Lost Canadian bill. So there you go. I've had to really run through this thing. I'm open for any questions, and I'm sorry to have run so long.